this leads us on to a critical view of John Maynard Keynes, more commonly known as J.M. Keynes, who was a Cambridge economic professor at Cambridge University, obviously, who also served as an advisor to the government in World War One, economically, obviously. So therefore, after the war ended, he, in his advisory role, went to Versailles with Lloyd George and the other delegates from Britain. His job, obviously, being to give his opinion on reparations. The treaty was not to his liking, and he resigned. He expected it to be more about the reparations and more about economics, and was disappointed when it was concerned moreover with border disputes. However, he was a strong opponent of any reparations, believing that the peace should not make Germany economically weak, because that would be a bad thing for Britain, Europe and the world in the future years economically. So he was disgusted when the amount was bandied about, and even though it wasn't decided till 1921, the figures that were being talked about were way too huge for what he was willing to accept, so he resigned. Now, his views were far-sighted and probably ahead of his time, and very few other people would have actually agreed with them at the time, and they would have been very controversial in Britain and France. However, the treaty, when it was signed, was fairly popular in Britain, and they'd got what they wanted. They had the navy had been guaranteed, their supremacy, and the Germans had scuttled their fleet to Scapa Flow, and they'd also gained colonies from Germany. So initially, it seemed as though the treaty was a good one for Britain. But whilst Keynes had time off, having resigned, he'd written a book called The Economic Consequences of the Peace, and that was highly critical of the Versailles settlement, outlining the dangers to Europe it would cause. So it was a huge bestseller, and not only in Britain but in America, and that had two main effects. One, it changed the public opinion, starting off with the intellectual figures and the politicians, and then feeding down to the rest of the population that Versailles was too harsh, and that in itself is one of the reasons for the appeasement of the 1930s. So it's very influential and important. Secondly, it persuaded people in America not to ratify the treaty at the time, which they didn't, which was the reason why the Americans were not in the League of Nations. Sorry, got something in my eye. Better. So Keynes caused those two things happen, and has been criticised by historians for being over dramatic about it and actually being wrong, and saying that he caused a lot of the problems in the 1930s by getting the Americans not to sign, or having an impact on the Americans signing the treaty, and also by changing British public opinion to be against the treaty.